On the 6th of June 1816, snow began to fall on Vermont. It kept falling. By the 8th, it lay 18 inches deep in the town of Cabot. The frost came back in July. It came back again in August. Crops died in the ground from Maine to China, all in the same year, and nobody on Earth knew why. The answer had exploded 14 months earlier, 10,000 miles away. Before that year was over, the broken sky would starve villages on 3 continents, empty farm towns across New England, and put hungry crowds outside the bakeries of Europe. It would also trap 5 travelers inside a rented house on a Swiss lake, where the youngest of them, an 18-year-old, would dream up something you know by name. Hold on to that house, we are coming back to it. But the story does not start in Vermont or in Switzerland. It starts on an island most of the world had never heard of in April of 1815. Mount Tambora stood about 4,300 meters tall on the island of Sumbawa in the Dutch East Indies in what is now Indonesia. It was one of the tallest peaks in the archipelago, and it had been quiet for so long that most people who lived in its shadow had no idea it was a volcano at all. On the 5th of April 1815, it cleared its throat. The blast was heard hundreds of kilometers away, and British officers across the islands mistook it for cannon fire. Some put their men under arms and went looking for the battle. There was no battle. There was a mountain winding up. 5 days later, on the 10th of April, Tambora tore itself open. The eruption column punched some 43 kilometers into the sky, through the weather, into the stratosphere. Pyroclastic flows rolled down every flank of the mountain and erased the villages below. The village that shared the volcano's name simply ceased to exist. The detonations were heard 2,600 kilometers away. Roughly 41 cubic kilometers of the mountain went into the air, and by morning, Tambora was a third shorter than it had been. 11,000 to 12,000 people were killed outright by the flows, the ash, and the tsunami that followed. It remains the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history, several times the size of Krakatoa. And the eruption itself, the fire and the noise and the dying, was not the part that would reach Vermont. The part that would reach Vermont was invisible. Tens of millions of tons of sulfur lifted above the weather, spreading out across the planet into a thin, sunlight-scattering veil. The eruption lasted days. The veil would hang there for years. Watch what it does to 1816. Spread across the whole sky, the veil dimmed the world by what sounds like nothing, around half a degree Celsius on the global average. But a global average is a calm number describing a violent thing. The cold did not arrive evenly. It arrived in pieces, in the wrong months, in places that had done nothing to deserve it. In New England, the frosts of May 1816 killed the first plantings. Then came the June snow. Farmers replanted, and the ground accepted the seed, and through July and August the sky played with them, days near 95 degrees Fahrenheit collapsing to freezing within hours. On the 28th of August, a killing frost settled the question. In Connecticut, it was said that no more than a quarter of the corn was fit to eat, and much of what survived was too moldy even for animals. The price of oats went from 12 cents a bushel to 92. Not a market swing, a multiplication. Across the Atlantic, the same veil wore a different costume. Instead of frost, Europe got rain, cold and nearly constant, week after week through the summer. The wheat rotted in Britain. In Ireland, the wheat, the oats, and the potatoes failed together, and famine took hold in the north and southwest. In France and the German states, the harvest came in broken, and crowds began to gather where the grain was, outside markets, outside bakeries, in city after city. Switzerland, hemmed in by its mountains, starved as hard as anywhere on the continent. And this was a continent with no cushion left. Europe was 1 year out from the Napoleonic Wars, demobilized, indebted, full of soldiers with no work and roads full of beggars. The weather hit a system that was already on its knees. Hunger brought its escort. Typhus began moving through Ireland, then England, and it would keep moving for 3 years. Through all of it, note the strangest part. The cause of every one of these disasters was the same single event, and not one person suffering through them knew it. People do not sit quietly inside an unexplained catastrophe. They explain it. That year, sunspots were large enough to see with the naked eye at sunset, and newspapers wondered aloud whether the sun itself was failing, cooling, breaking apart. Preachers had an older explanation: judgment. Farmers' almanacs hunted for patterns that were not there. Every theory had one thing in common: it was wrong, and it could not have been right because the answer was a year old, an ocean away, and invisible. The historian John D. Post would later give the episode its proper name: the last great subsistence crisis in the Western world. The last time the West, as a whole, simply did not have enough food. In the shadow of Tambora itself, the eruption and the famine and disease that followed killed at least 71,000 people, by some estimates 100,000 or more. In Europe, famine and typhus took tens of thousands more. No one will ever have an exact number. The ranges are the honest version. New England did its mourning with wagons. Families that had farmed the same Vermont hillsides for generations gave up, packed, and went west, and the emptied towns never refilled. The year settled into memory under the names people gave it afterward: the poverty year. 1800 and froze to death. Now, go back to the house on the lake. In June of 1816, on the shore of Lake Geneva, the rain that was drowning Europe's harvests had trapped 5 travelers indoors: the poet Lord Byron, his physician John Polidori, Percy Shelley, Claire Clairmont, and 18-year-old Mary Godwin. To pass the dark evenings, they read German ghost stories aloud, until Byron issued a challenge. Each of them would write their own. Mary's came to her in a waking dream, a corpse-pale figure stirring to life on a table. She would publish it 2 years later as Frankenstein. Polidori grew Byron's abandoned fragment into The Vampire, the template for every aristocratic vampire since. And Byron, that same sunless summer, wrote a poem called Darkness, which opens: "I had a dream which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished." None of them knew they were writing inside a volcano's weather. Nobody did, for almost a century, until 1913, when an American physicist named William Humphreys finally showed what a stratospheric dust veil does to the temperature of the ground. The year without a summer got its answer 97 years late, long after everyone who had lived through it was dead. Here is the thing 1816 actually proved, and it has not stopped being true. Every harvest on Earth, then and now, rests on one quiet assumption: that next year's sky will behave like last year's. One mountain, in one April, withdrew that assumption for a single year, and the strongest nations on the planet buckled. The sky came back, and the harvests came back, and they have come back every year since. That is a streak. It was never a promise.